Australia has stressed the importance of freedom of navigation after an Indonesian minister floated the idea of imposing a toll on the Strait of Malacca. The idea is deeply controversial and would face fierce opposition if it was seriously proposed. Foreign Affairs reporter Stephen Jedgetts is in Sydney. Hi there, Stephen. So when did the minister raise this idea?
Look, this was raised yesterday by Indonesia's Finance Minister, a man, it has to be said, Mel, who's known for being a little bit antagonistic and provocative at times. Nonetheless, I think it's safe to say his comments have drawn plenty of attention. The minister essentially pointed to the war in Iran, where, of course, ahead of the US blockade, Iran was essentially trying to first strangle the Strait of Hormuz and is now, of course, trying to impose effectively a toll on ships that go through the strait. Now, the Indonesian minister said that Indonesia had its own geographic advantage, namely the fact that it's one of three countries which bestrides the Strait of Malacca, an even more important trade artery than the Strait of Hormuz. And he suggested provocatively that Indonesia should look, together with Malaysia and Singapore, at imposing a tax or a levy on ships going through the strait, saying that it fit with the president's broader strategic policy of making sure Indonesia was a significant strategic player. Now, obviously, this idea is a long way from being seriously proposed. And as I mentioned, this minister does have a track record at times of being a bit provocative, but given the state of the world at the moment, given the flux that we're seeing in the strategic order, and given the anxiety we are seeing right now globally about the pressure being placed on the rules-based order, this proposal, which would fly in the face of both international law and of precedent in the region, has certainly gathered a bit of attention around Southeast Asia and beyond.
Yeah, as you say, Stephen, it's a bit of a hypothetical at the moment, but what are the chances of it ever actually becoming a reality?
Well, there are several things that stand in the way of it becoming a reality. At the top of the list is the fact that, as the minister acknowledged during his speech, at least according to Indonesian media, it would have to get both Singapore and Malaysia on board if it wanted to impose some sort of toll. And that is very unlikely to happen. Singapore has already made it very clear that freedom of passage is for it non-negotiable. It has no interest in seeing tolls imposed arbitrarily in violation of UNCLOS in this part of the neighbourhood or in any part of the world. It's refused to pay a toll to Iran for its ships through the Strait of Hormuz as a result of that. And Malaysia is also unlikely to take it up. So in the absence of that agreement, it's unlikely to happen. Also, of course, the fact that both the US and China would arc up, to put it mildly, as well as other countries like Japan and South Korea that remain very dependent, highly dependent on the flow of oil and goods through the Strait of Malacca. Any attempt to essentially impose an arbitrary toll on the strait would be greeted with fierce opposition from them. So for those reasons, you'd have to say it's very unlikely to happen. Nonetheless, the fact that this is being raised seemingly deliberately, even as a bit of a trial balloon, is interesting, to say the least, particularly at the current moment of flux in strategic affairs.
Yeah, and what's the response been from Australia so far?
Look, Richard Marles, the Defence Minister, was asked about the remarks, or the proposal, if you want to call it that, earlier today, and he played a pretty straight bat, saying he did not want to comment on the specific proposal, so he's not being drawn on it. That said, more broadly, he said it was really important to stress the importance of freedom of navigation, saying that Australia depended on that for all of its trade and also for its prosperity and security. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
We are completely committed to the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea and freedom of navigation and the broader rules-based order. But, for Australia, which has a growing proportion of our national income derived from trade, the physical manifestation of that is our sea lines of communication, it is our sea lanes, is profoundly important for us. Now, freedom of navigation on the high seas is a fundamental principle contained in the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, and Australia very much stands for that.
Now, Mel, even assuming, as is likely, that this comes to absolutely nothing and this balloon slowly floats back down to Earth, It is nonetheless a bit of an uncomfortable reminder for Australia that there are parts of the Indonesian system, not all of it, but parts of it that don't share the same worldview that you find in Canberra. There are parts or elements of the Indonesian system who do talk openly about what could be done to exploit Indonesia's position, notwithstanding the fact that it would run in the face of the rules-based order. And of course, given Australia and Indonesia have just signed a really critical new defence agreement just in January this year, a real coup for the government, it's perhaps a reminder of the fact that it's always difficult to navigate strategic and defence relationships with a country as complicated as Indonesia.